Hey, Farah. We'll get started in a few minutes. We'll start at the top of the hour. Looks like there's a few of you out there, so go ahead and let us know where you're coming from as we wait to get started. Everybody should be seeing PowerPoint as we wait. For those who need it, you can download the Excel file using that QR code there if you don't have it. So I do see a few of you out there already. So if you're out there, please just let me know where you're coming from. Where are you dialing in from? Anything you might hope to learn today? Would love to know. And the question is, as we're waiting, does anyone know how many Excel users it takes to screw in a light bulb? It only takes one, but they'll spend hours formatting the chart that shows how bright it is. Currently in Egypt from your Tarek. Great, Farah. And we got Krishan from India. Welcome. We'll get started here in a few more minutes. Does anyone know what the most dangerous place in Excel is? Most dangerous cell in Excel. C4, of course. All right, we got about another 2 minutes before we'll get started. 2-3 minutes here. Does anyone know what shirt size Bill Gates wears? XL. I didn't say they were good jokes. I just said they were Excel jokes. All right. Anyone else who's out there, let us know where you're coming from, where you're calling in from. And I'll just remind everybody, if you haven't downloaded the file, we're going to be talking about tables today. And you can get a copy of the file at the using this QR code here. You can get it from my website. Hey, welcome Matt from Houston and Lilith from Canada. Great. So we got a group out there. And De Camilla, I might have said that wrong, but from the Philippines, welcome. So we're getting a group here. We're just going to give it another minute or two before we get started. But in the meantime, does anyone know where do spreadsheets go to down their errors? Any ideas where spreadsheets go to down their errors? They all go to the formula bar. Welcome, Igor from Belgium. Got a nice diverse group all over the world, it looks like today. So fabulous. Just as a reminder, if anyone hasn't downloaded the Excel file, you can use this QR code or you can go to my website and it's under resources. There's Excel files. It's the first download on that page. It should have some information about Excel tables in it. We're going to give it one more minute, then we'll get started here. So let's see, one more Excel joke. Did anyone hear about the constipated spreadsheet? Anyone know why the spreadsheet was constipated? Glad you like the formula bar, Kim. The reason the spreadsheet was constipated was because he couldn't budget. There's my finance joke. He couldn't budget. All right. Why don't we go ahead and get started here? So today we're going to talk about Excel tables. Last time we talked about the NA function, and before that we talked about dynamic arrays. So I'm really excited to talk about Excel tables. If you're using Excel tables today, let me know in the chat. I'd love to get an idea of who's using them, who's not. So go ahead and just throw it in the chat if you're using them. A little about me. Most of you, I think, know me by now, but if you don't, name's Paul Barnhurst. I go by the FP&A guy. That's the name of my business. I have a website called the FP&Aguy.com. I have 3 podcasts I do. So I like to talk. Probably why I'm doing this today. I have one called Financial Modelers Corner, all about financial modeling. Another one called Future Finance that I host with Glenn Hopper. We talk about AI and technology and finance. And then FP&A Tomorrow, where we talk all about what makes great FP&A. And often Excel gets talked about in all 3 of these podcasts. As you can imagine, if you're in finance, odds are you're using Excel. So my background is I spent most of my career in FP&A. I spent the first few years in procurement, then went back to grad school, did a little bit of report writing, but mostly FP&A. So today I do content creation training. I'm a podcast host. And like I mentioned, today we're going to discuss Excel. So what we're going to talk about, we did a quick introduction to myself. We're going to do an overview of Excel tables. So Bradford's mentioning he's familiar. Anyone else familiar with Excel tables? I'd love to know if you're using them. Just put a yes or no in the chat. We're going to give an overview of Excel tables. We're going to talk about what tabular data is, kind of flat file data, which is how you generally want to structure your data for Excel tables. Then we're going to spend most of the time today on structured table references. So I think most of you have a basic understanding of tables. So this will be more really around the formulas, how they work, some of those type of things. We will cover some basics as well. So let me just start with a quick definition of what tables are. A Microsoft Excel table is basically a structured range versus an unstructured range. So an unstructured range is what you typically put into Excel. You have something from C4 to C11. When you put it into a table, that C4 to C11 is going to be named. The column could be revenue. And so now you're referencing in your formulas the name of the columns and the rows versus C4 times B4 or C4 times D4 could be price times quantity. It allows for efficient sorting, filtering, analysis. It enhances data accessibility. And one of the most important things I would say today is if you're using Copilot, you're going to need to use Excel tables. Copilot works with tables. If you're going to use Power Query, you need to understand Excel tables. The reality is Excel is making a big effort to have everybody put their data in tables. So it's really important to understand them. Here I have a list of benefits. I'm not going to read all of these, but I'll run through a few of them. There's 10 here. it improves your formulas once you learn the way to write the formulas. It does take some real learning to get used to it. It's easier to share data. It organizes it, filtering, sorting, automatic expansion. You have dynamic named ranges. You get consistent formatting because the entire object is a table. You don't have to worry. I added a record. Did it get formatted right? That's automatically going to happen. Another one I really like is what we'll call calculated columns, and we'll walk through an example of what that is. As I mentioned before, it integrates with other Excel features, whether that's pivot tables, Power Query, charts, slicers, all benefit from tables. And then it also has a total row that you can easily add, and we'll walk through that. So we're going to go ahead and go into Excel now. I'll come back to the deck a little later. And so everybody should have received the Excel tables file. It was on my website. If you didn't get it, you can go to the fpnaguy.com, resources, Excel files, and it's going to be the first file. So it looks like pretty much everybody is saying, yes, they have an understanding of tables. So that's great. I'm only going to do a real brief overview on tables, and we're mostly going to focus on what I'll call table nomenclature. And someone asked about this being recorded. It's recorded. It will be available here on StreamYard on demand. It's going to be streamed to YouTube, so you can watch it there. And it's on LinkedIn. So there's plenty of places you'll be able to watch a recording of this if you want to go back and watch it. As well, if you want to learn more on tables, I've shared this before on LinkedIn. My Excel tables course is free. It's about an hour and a half on tables. It's available on Thinkific. If you go to my website, you can look up the one Excel tables. That's open to anyone to take for free. Much of what I share today comes from that course, but it does go into some more detail than what we'll cover today, as it's about an hour and 45 minutes to go through all of it. So we're going to kind of just cover some of it today. So those are things available beyond today. So real quick, just to give an overview of what a table is. Here I have some data that's been saved into a table. You'll notice if you have a table, you will get a context-specific menu. See here where it's green and it says table design. If I click off the table, that goes away. So that's how you know you're in a table. So a couple things with tables. One, generally, every other row will be banded. I'll show you how you can do that. They have a header. So you'll notice here it says products, month, category, quantity. This one right here, if it doesn't have a name, it will call it column 1. So I added a column here so you can see that. So that's your headers row right here. Next, it's going to have a filter button that allows you to sort and filter. By default, it will have that. You could see here we have our rows. Down at the bottom, you can add a total row. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And then the one other thing is what's called a calculated column. And I'll just show an example of that real quick here, and we'll talk a little bit more about it. If I write a formula in a table, a calculated column means it automatically basically spills down or fills in that formula for all the rows. I can turn that off, but by default, that's really handy because I don't have to drag it down. I don't have to do anything. I enter it once and it applies it to every row in that column. So at a high level, that's the basics of a table. What I want to show next is just some areas where tables are beneficial. I'm just going to show 2 quick examples. The first is Power Query. If you have anything in an Excel file and you want to load it to Power Query from the Excel file directly, so having the file open, I want you to see what happens. So if you have the file open with me, I would ask everybody to go to the data ribbon and say, get data here from table range. It should be the 4th one. Unless you have an older version, it might look a little different, but you should see a from table range. If you click on that, before you can load something to Power Query, it creates a table. So notice we're not going to go into how to use Power Query, but notice before you could come into Power Query, it required your data to be in a table. Now notice if I load this table, we'll say I made some changes. I didn't in this case, but if I had made some changes and I wanted to load it back to Excel. So I'm going to come here, I'm going to say table, and I'm going to load it in my existing worksheet. And I'm just going to load it right here. Now, it brought back the exact same data because I made no changes, but notice it also exported it as a table. So Power Query requires you to learn how to use tables and get comfortable with tables. That's the first thing I want to show. The second is just showing one of the benefits of tables. And if any of you attended the NA functions, I talked about this. We walked through how to build this graph. We won't walk through how to build it today. But what I want you to see is if you come in here and you look at the data, so if you go to select data, you're going to notice the data here does not reference a table. You can see if I go edit, it references the range. But what it's doing behind the scenes is it recognizes this as a table. So if I add a new month here, 1/1/2023, and we'll just say 45,000, notice the chart automatically updated. It changed the data range because it recognizes that range as part of a table. That's a really big benefit of tables. Others are pivot tables. You put anything in a pivot table and you have it in a table, you don't have to worry about changing your row reference because it will reference that object. Also, tables work with slicers. So those are a few benefits of tables. We're going to come back here in a minute and do a little bit of work on the sample table. But before I do that, I want to talk about some of the rules for how you should typically structure your data for tables. There are exceptions to this, but this is the general rule. And as much as possible, I would recommend following it. So the first thing is you always want your column headers in one row. How many have ever got data where you have multiple headers? Like they have the year in one row, they have the month in another row, or they split them out. Always a pain to work with. So your headers should be in one row. Each row, each data record is one row. So we don't have situations where you have drill and then date, then cells. This right here is one complete record. You don't want any blanks. You want to avoid blanks like this. You don't want any subtotals. The idea of a table is it should be your most granular level of data so you can roll it up and aggregate it any way you want. So it should be at whatever the lowest level is, whether that's day, week, month, hour, whatever level you need it at to analyze it. That's the level you want your data in for your table. Then, like I said, you shouldn't have subtotals or totals. But real quick, we're going to show an example of what happens here. So here I have some summarized data. If I put this into a pivot table, let's just see what happens, right? So we have product, we have subtotal, we have total. It's for the month of June. Great for a report potentially to have summarized data, but not good for analyzing. So if I take this and I go insert and put it into a pivot table, we'll put it on the existing worksheet. Somewhere over here, we'll say F5. And what you're going to notice, one, date doesn't show up. And so if I put the values down in the bottom, we'll put the product in the rows, and the subtotal and total show up. So I'd have to go through and remove those to get the right number. Nor do I know what date I have in my data. So summarized data is not good for putting into a pivot table for running your analysis on. It's fine for your summary. So that's the first example. And feel free if you have questions to ask questions, or if I'm going too fast to tell me. I'm happy to slow down. Second, we have what I'll kind of call messy data. And what I mean by that is you can see there's blanks here. We'll put a 0 here. Sometimes that's subtotals, sometimes it doesn't. The months are in the column headers. So what happens if I put this into a pivot table? So I go insert pivot table from table range, existing worksheet, and we'll stick it here in I5. So I put it into I5. First thing you'll notice, we have products, same as before. So I can put products in row. Again, I have subtotal and total, so I could go ahead and remove those, but a little extra work. Here's where the real problem is. Notice there's no date. Each of the dates have to go in values because they have the amounts. So that means I got to drag it down 3 times. If I had a year, I'd be dragging down every one. I've seen tables created this way with like 50 different items in the values. And it's a nightmare versus having one value and individual months. So there's no way to aggregate these months together. And I'll show you what I mean on the next example. Well, this is what I'd call messy data. Sometimes, it's cross-tabulated as well. So you have dates in columns instead of in rows. You had subtotals and totals. You have a bunch of blanks instead of zeros, which is ideal because it's just easier for performing math operations. So that's the second example. The third example is, what does the pivot table look like when we structured our data right? So we followed these 5 rules we've talked about. So if we take this, we go insert pivot table from table range, existing worksheet. And again, we'll just stick it over here in H4, H5, somewhere in that area. Click OK. Here's the key difference. Notice we now have a month filled. There's a column. There is their own field for month. So I can drop it in here and it automatically created some dates hierarchy. Excel's able to do that. So I can drill down from month all the way down to the date. I can put those on or off my pivot table because I've built it right. I can put my category in the filter. So if I had more than one category, in this case, I only have one. But if I had more than one, and then I can drop the amount down here, the product here, and the grand total is going to be right because there's no subtotals. So it makes it much cleaner when you put it into a pivot table from a table that's structured in a tabular format. And so you can use Power Query. If this wasn't in the right format, you could use Power Query to take something like this and convert it to this. And I'll probably cover that in a future session. So that's how you want your data to look like. Now what I want to do is I'm going to spend about 5 minutes here and just walk through how to create a table, what the table menu looks like. Then we're going to talk about how you write formulas with tables, because that's probably, in my mind, the hardest thing for most people to learn when they're working with Excel. So if everybody can go to this sheet with me, if you go to the sample table, what we're going to do is you can highlight any row in the table, any cell, or you can highlight the whole table. Doesn't matter. It will figure it out either way. But we're going to go ahead and highlight it, and then we're going to create a table. There's 3 ways you can do it. You can come here and say Insert Table. You could hit Control L, or you can hit Control T. I typically use Control T. And so you'll see it figured out the whole range. It figured out my tables has headers. If that was checked off, you'd want to turn it on and then click OK. And it's now created a table. I'm going to enlarge this a little bit so everybody can see it. Notice I now have the table design. So within the table design, the first thing I always like to do is come up to table name and give my table a meaningful name. And so here, maybe I'm going to name it product underscore data. You can't have spaces. You can't start with numbers. You can use an underscore. You can use a 0. So I've named it. And then you'll see there's an opportunity to resize it if I wanted to make it more columns or rows. I can put it into a pivot table. I can add slicers. If I had any duplicates, it has an option here to remove duplicates. So if I click that, it didn't find any. This converts it back to a table. The external table data allows you to refresh. There's actually an opportunity to export it to a SharePoint list and a few other things. If this was connected to another system, you could do here. We won't talk much about that. Then I just want to show the table style options, the table styles briefly. And I want to show a couple examples of calculated column. Then we'll move into the formula structure. So header row, you can turn on and off your header row. But notice it will come back. You could actually even type something over it if you want. Wouldn't recommend doing that, but you can turn on and off your header row. You can turn on and off your filter. You can turn on and off the total row. It will typically sum whatever your last row is. It uses the subtotal formula and gives you a bunch of different options. You can also write custom functions. So I could take the average here. I could take the count, the max, whatever I want in the total. You can only have one total row, but you could do totals for different columns. You know, here I could do a count if I wanted. The others wouldn't apply. So that's your subtotal. Then the other four here, the banded rows, banded columns, last column, first column, that's all just formatting. So you could turn off banded rows if you want. I like it. It makes it easier to read, but you can turn them off. You could have banded columns if you wanted. And then you can bold the first and last column. So it's all cosmetic, so to speak. So I'm going to leave it with the default header row, banded row, filter button. The last one is your table styles. And so you could see you have a bunch of different automatic looks and fill you can do. You can come through and play with this. You can also build your own style where you could use your company colors if you wanted to. So I'm just going to go back to a basic one here. We'll do this one. I think that's what we had originally. So that's your menu bar. The one other thing I want to show is calculated columns. So let's say we're going to have a discount. Let's say I write the number 10. Notice it doesn't spill down. It only spills down if it's a formula. So if I want the same number in every cell, I'm going to do equals 10%. And now it treats it like a calculated column. So I could figure out discounted revenue here if I wanted. So if I write it, it's automatically going to create the next column. And I can just take this times this, and it's going to apply it to every single row. So here it showed the just a discount amount. If I wanted, maybe I want what the revenue is after the discount, I could do 1 minus. So it's 90% here. I could do whatever formula I want. So my discounted revenue is 125. My percentage is 10. The next thing to notice is if I add a new row right here, notice it automatically adds it to the bottom. You can see it expanded the row. I can always right click here and delete rows if I want. Delete a column, delete a row. I can insert them. So it's smart enough to know when you add data that it should make it part of the object. And that is the basics of a table. The other thing I'll show just real quick is you could add a slicer to a table. A slicer is nothing more than a visual filter. So you'll notice this filtered at the same time. One other thing to notice, if you have total rows on, which you can turn on, the total will adjust according to the filter. And so that's a visual filter, just a slicer. You can add them for any column from a table. All right. So where I want to spend the rest of the time is what I call table nomenclature. But before I jump into that, one, we'll see if there's any questions. Two, we'll do a quick Excel joke. Let's see. Does anyone know what happens when a spreadsheet gets sick? You have V throw up. Like I said, I never said the jokes were good. All righty. So let's jump into table nomenclature. And what I mean by that is, what is this? Why does it look like this? Or if I reference this right here, why does it look like this instead of cell I3? If I reference the total, you'll notice it looks different again. So we're going to talk through how Excel writes the table name, the column, the different identifiers to allow you to write formulas off your tables. So the first thing is just knowing the difference between structured and unstructured. I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but you can see this is the exact same data right here. Not in a table, in a table. Notice the formula here. Revenue right here is C8 times D8, right? C9 times D9, C10 times D10. Here, it's quantity times price in brackets with an @ symbol. We'll talk about why the @ symbol. The @ symbol, we'll talk more about in a minute, but it basically says apply it to each row in the table. So it applies it to the individual rows. This is the name, and then pretty much everything will have brackets around it. So that's structured versus unstructured. And next, let's just talk a little bit about how the syntax works. And then we'll walk through some actual examples. So here is a potential formula from a table. So the first thing you'll notice here is you're going to have your table name. So if I come back here and I highlight, let's say, this column, first thing it's going to do is give me the table name. That's the table name. So the first thing you're going to see is your table name. Then you have, in this case, what's called an item specifier. An item specifier is used to specify the body, the header, the total row. So if we come down here, these are the special item specifiers. All, the entire table, data, headers, totals. So you'll always see them with a bracket around them and a pound symbol. So notice here has that bracket around it, the pound symbol for totals. Then we have the comma, and it's referencing a certain column. So you can see here, it's going to have brackets around it. And this entire thing is referencing the total number from gross revenue. Hence why it has these second brackets around it. So this area right here is the table specifier. Then you can see there's another comma. Once again, you're mentioning the table name, and then it's referencing a column. You'll see, similar to gross revenue, you'll notice here, and I'm just going to adjust this a little bit there. You can see it's referencing the discount amount. So basically, what you have is you're going to have the table name, whatever you named your table. Then you're going to have your column specifiers. Whatever you named your columns, they will be in brackets, right? So if I come back to my sample table here, and I just reference the column, you'll notice table name, column name. Then you have an item specifier. This item specifier we talked about. There's 4 of them. There's the all, there's the data, the headers, and the totals. And we'll walk through some examples here in a minute. Then you have a table specifier, which basically is combining data together, like a totals from a column. So it's giving you one cell. and then you're going to use brackets around all your specifiers. The other things to be aware of, you will also use commas to just separate columns. If you want to combine columns together, you can use a colon, and it will reference that entire range. Just like with unstructured references, you can use a colon. And then you also have the @ symbol, which is a special specifier here that references to the current row. We'll walk through some examples with that. So let's just start, and we're going to do a couple examples here together. So what, that's a little bigger than I wanted. Let me shrink that down. What we have here is we have a table over to the side. And the first one, what we've done, this formula is referencing the headers row. So these are going to show different examples of way to reference the headers. So if I wanted to reference just the headers product row, if I come up here and highlight it, you'll notice, wait, I did that the wrong way. Right here, it's going to show the formula. So I want to do it here. If I go here, you'll notice it's going to equal product underscore cells, open, there's an open up bracket. Then there's the headers, that's your item specifier, a comma, referencing the column, a close bracket. And that returns the word product. So I could even type that. If I start typing product here, notice it's going to bring up a bunch of tables. So I'm going to look for the one called product cells. I'm going to hit tab, and now I have my table. Next, I could type my brackets here, and you could see it has down at the bottom headers. So I could do that. And then I could add my next one. You'll see there's products. If I hit tab, it's going to bring that up. And I could type it in manually if I wanted. I try not to type table formulas because it's much easier to just point to the cell. At least I find it is. Unless you have really short column and table names, then maybe. So, here it's just referencing month, right? The only difference between the first one and this one is we've just referenced the month column. Next one, what if I wanted to reference 2 column headers? What would that look like? Well, you'll notice here I did a transpose just so it would go down the columns instead of going over the rows. I don't need to do that. Let me just show you what I mean. So if I came here and reference both these, you'll see it's spilled into different columns. So the only difference here is you're going to have that colon and add the next column over. If I wanted category, I could type category here, and now it goes over 3 columns. You can see it right there. And then down here, in this case, I've referenced every header. Notice here, I only need to reference the item specifier because I'm wanting all the columns. So if I was to come up here and highlight every column like this, it's going to give me the headers. Again, I did transpose here just so it would go down the rows so you could see formulas. And notice, since this is considered kind of dynamic, in that if I add another header, this will adjust. That formula only lives in the first cell. So what I mean by that is, let's just say I added a new column here. Let's call it revenue. Now notice revenue automatically got added here. And if I drag down the formula, it's going to give me an NA because the formula lives here and the rest is just spilling. Forgive me 1 second. I need a little bit of water. Is there any questions from anyone? All right, let's keep going. So that we've just did all the headers. Now I'm just going to go through and show a couple examples of what happens if we reference the entire table. What are the different ways we can reference the table? So the first one here says reference all data within a table, excluding headers and total row. So notice here, all it's referencing is the table name. So if I come over here and highlight everything but the header and the total, it's going to just give it the table name. So I could just type equals product underscore and find cells 2. That's going to give me just the data. Now, what if I want headers, data, and total rows? What is that going to look like? Well, we can do that two ways. I could come here, reference everything, and you'll notice there it adds all at the end. So I could come in here and type products, product, find my cells underscore 2, put in an open bracket, and notice it's then going to give me all the options. Do I want at this row? Do I want a column? No, I want all my data. So I'm going to come down, hit tab. We'll type in the word all and close it. So that's the second example. Third example, what if I want it with just the headers and the data? I don't want totals. So then let's just come up here and see what it looks like if I highlight everything without totals. So notice right now it says headers. Now it's showing the columns until I get down to the bottom. And what it's giving me is it's giving me two item specifiers. It's saying, give me all the headers and all the data. And so that will exclude the totals. Someone was asking, is there going to be a recording of it? Yeah, they will be a recording. I mentioned before, it will be on LinkedIn, YouTube, and you can watch it again here on StreamYard. It will be available on demand for a while. So those are examples of referencing the entire data set. Now I'm just going to walk through. I know this is a little repetitive, but I think it's good to see it a few times, especially if you're not familiar with tables. So next we're going to do some referencing to the totals row. Then we'll do columns. Then we'll talk about how you write formulas. So here, if I want to reference the word total, how it's going to write that. So I just come down here and hit total. It's going to write product cells. And then you notice it's going to have the double bracket. It's going to reference that item specifier of totals and then the column, whatever the column is I want. So in this one here, oh, sorry, I went down to this one right here, item specifier, and then the column I want is products. If I wanted to reference the month, you'll notice it returns 0 because it's blank. Only difference here is going to be month. It's still going to be totals. And you can just see each of these. All you're doing is changing the column you want. So you're doing table name, item specifier of totals, your comma, your column, and then you're putting the whole thing in brackets to say, I want that range. Now, if I wanted to reference everything, I would just use the total specifier. All right. So all I would do is I'd come here and just say equals and that entire range, and it's going to reference them all. Or I could come in here again. I could find the one I wanted. It's product cells 3, open bracket. I want just totals. I'll come down and hit tab, close the bracket. And now I have my total row. The last example I want to do is referencing columns. And then we're going to talk about what I call absolute and relative references and how they work for tables, which is very different than columns. But I'll pause for a second. Any questions from anyone? If you have a question, please just put it in the chat. I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. Give it just 1 minute and see if we have any. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so why don't we keep going? So what's this first example? Reference all the data in a column, excluding the header and totals. So in this case, you can see I have the products. without the header. So all I'm doing is highlighting every single row. If you don't highlight every single row, notice it gives you an unstructured reference because it's not recognizing a full object. It's saying that's not an object in this table. And so it will give me the data, but it won't show up in a tabled reference, nor will it give me all the records. So if a new record's added, it wouldn't be included. So you want to make sure you're getting the table nomenclature so that if I add a record here, insert below, and maybe we add spreadsheet because that's a product we want to sell. You can see it just added it there. If this was not a table object, it wouldn't do that. Right. I'm going to go ahead and undo that for now. And so you can see once again, all it is the table and the column. Now we're going to start getting into some formulas. Let's say I want to sum all the data in multiple adjacent columns. So in this case, I want to sum month 1 through 3. All I need to do is write a sum formula and then highlight everything. And you'll notice table name, open bracket, month 1, column or colon, bracket for month 3, and then a bracket all the way around it. So, right, if I did this right here, and so I'm missing one, it's the same basic idea, right? It's doing that range. The only difference is it's referencing the table objects. So when I add records, it will automatically update. So what if we want to update something in a non-adjacent column? How would we do that? So in this case, I want month 1 and 3. Well, we could write it, but again, I'm just going to come up here, do month 1, put a comma, highlight month 3, close it, and it just totaled it. You know, if I wanted month 2, I could change this. Now, ideally, if it was month 2, I would probably do a semicolon and because they're next to each other, but I can do it either way. So the difference between your adjacent and your non-adjacent is very similar to anything else in Excel. It's just whether you're using a colon or a comma. Okay, so now let's reference all the data in the column, including the header and totals. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set equals and come up here and reference all of month 1. So notice here, it's the same as when we reference the entire table. This is the exact same. If I deleted this last part, I would get the entire table. But I added a column and said, oh, now give me the month. Outside of it has the double brackets. If I went like this and deleted this and this right here, right, I'm going to get all the data. It's going to spill because there's something in the way there. But if I delete that, you can see I get the whole table. So now I could come in and change this to say, I really want just month 1. And I want everything, all the different specifiers, the header specifier or the total. And so that's going to reference month 1. All right. So let's talk absolute versus relative references. I really wish Excel would change the way they do these. If any of you ever provide comments on Excel's website, this is a good one to recommend they change at some point because I think it scares a lot of people to learn it. So, right, if I want to make something absolute or relative, so let's say I have something here equals this cell, right? So right now it says C5. I can come up and hit F4. First time I hit it, it's going to put $2 signs around it. It's an absolute reference. No matter what? It's not going to adjust. I can drag that down over. It's always going to say C5. The next one, if I do $5 says make the C relative. So anytime I move it over a column, it's going to reference the new column, but keep the row absolute. This does the opposite. It keeps the column absolute and the row relative. And this one, it's completely relative. If I drag this down, it's going to now reference C6. If I drag it over, it's now going to reference D6. So that's how relative and absolute work with unstructured references. Now let's just walk through creating what a relative reference looks like, what an absolute reference looks like, right? So here I've referenced these three numbers. January. Here I've referenced February, March, April. What if I want to make it absolute so I could sum these together? I want to sum Jan to February, Jan to March, Jan to April. So let's just try, right? If I come here and sum these, you can do it with me. If I hit F4, it doesn't work, right? There's no absolute to do. So how absolute works is you have to reference the column twice. So here is how it would work using dollar signs. You'll see I have J8 to J10. That J8 is absolute, right? If I drag that over, now it does J8 to K10. I drag it over again, it works. So you can see it's giving me the entire range. If I add that all up, look down at the bottom, it's going to match the 7,800. So if I want to do the same with the table, what we have to do is we have to enter it in twice. And the part we want absolute has to have a colon and be referenced twice. So I'm going to write this. And if you could write this with me, because it does take a little getting used to. So we're going to go equals sum, and we're going to get January here. Now to make this January absolute, so when I drag it over, it doesn't change, I have to add it twice. And I can take out, I don't have to put the name if I don't want to, so I'm going to delete it because it's a little easier to read. So that right there, if I just did this and I drag this over, I'm going to get 1,500 because it's absolute. It's always going to reference just January. So now what I need to do is I need to add January one more time to the end, but I want it to be relative. So if I don't put it in there twice, it's relative. So that is saying that's the equivalent of J8 to J10. The difference is that we're just using table nomenclature. So this part is your dollar sign. This is your relative reference. So now when I drag that over, it changed this part to February. It left this part as January. When I drag this over, same happens. Drag it again. And why did it not? There we go. The same happens. It goes to April. So that is how you do relative and absolute references. That is probably one of the two hardest things to get used to with tables. So please let me know if there's any questions or you want me to go through that again. I'll give it 1 minute to see if there's any questions before I go through a couple more examples here. All right, I'm not seeing any questions, so we got a quiet group. Hopefully everybody's learning. All right. So one other thing that's weird about tables, when you copy tables, they do not copy the same as regular cell references. And here's what I mean. So take this first number, hit Control C. So this is a structured reference to table 24, month 1. Copy this and put it in month 2. Notice when I copied and pasted it, it did not change. The column reference did not change. I could copy it and do all of them, hit Control V. It's still going to reference month 1. Now I'm going to do it here, and I'm going to highlight this first column. We're going to delete these 3, and I'm going to try Control R and see if that will work. Again, referenced month 1 every time. If this was an unstructured reference, it would not do that in Excel. Now try it with the fill handle. So if we come here, we select the fill handle and drag it over, it will reference the new column. And one thing I want you to notice, I'm going to copy this over. What happens if I keep going past month 4? So let's drag the fill handle over again. Notice it now references sales rep. So it just starts over. So you could drag it and have it keep going. If you were to use the fill function here, so you can come up here and do a fill, say fill right, it doesn't work. It gives you the month 1 for everything. So you just need to know if you want it to basically be relative and adjust whatever your column is each time, you need to use the fill handle. That's the only way it will work. And that's why I put the months in columns, is to demonstrate this, because it's an easy way to show this. So that's just a kind of a little quirk with tables that often drives people crazy until you figure out that those are the different options. Next, what if I want to cumulatively sum something? So here, if I have some data and I want to do a cumulative sum, right, I can just write a formula here that says J5 to J5, make this absolute, drag it down. So now I got J5 to J6. Come down here, I got J5 to J35. Well, how do I do the same in a table if I want cumulative cells? So what you're going to, here's how it's going to look. You're going to reference headers, so that first row cells, and then the @ symbol. What that does is it makes a calculated column that always starts with header and then sums everything between header and your current row, because this @ symbol references a current row. You don't have a way to specify the individual row you want. It's automatically going to reference whatever row you're on, which is different from an unstructured reference, right? I can reference that. The only way I could reference that is if I typed in D8, because the @ symbol by default is going to do the current row. So the way we would write this is we're going to say equals, and I'm just going to hard code that in case I need to look at it. So let's see here. Give me a second. All right. So equals sum. And we're going to go here, comma, here, close it. And let's just delete all this out. And there you go. It calculates the column and I get the totals. That's how you do a cumulative, is you reference just the row above and an @ symbol for the current row, and it will automatically do a cumulative. And I think right now, I don't know that we have time to go through this full exercise. We have about 5 minutes left. Okay, so great question here. Let me answer this real quick. So I'm going to put this up on the screen from Justin. Do you default to using tables for all data sets? I do. If I have a data set I'm referencing elsewhere, I default to 99% of the time, I'm putting it in a table, because then it works better with the pivot table, works better with Power Query. I think it's easier to write your formulas once you're used to it. So yes, Justin. It also, if I'm going to use Copilot, it has to be in a table. So I default 99% of the time to a table. There might be the occasional time I don't, but I think it's a safe kind of way to think about it. So what's going to be in here is there's an exercise you can practice on your own And then there's the solutions. So if you want to practice getting familiar with writing these formulas, I encourage you to work on that on your own. So I'm going to go ahead and close this file now. And I just want to share a few more things back in the PowerPoint, and then I'll open it up to any questions. So we listed the benefits. What I want people to be aware of, if anyone's interested in this, this is part of a bundle that I have. The bundle includes 3 videos done by Ron Montero and myself for business partnering. They were used in the Wharton Online FP&A certificate, covering managing difficult relationships, accountability, and building relationships, tough conversations. There's a modeling design course in there, how to think about design when you're building financial models, data analysis, and then modern Excel, which includes tables, dynamic arrays, and Power Query. So if you sign up for the course this week, you'll save 50% off the regular price of $129.99. You can use the code CELEBRATION. There's the QR code to access it. You can also find it on my website under my courses. It has about 10 hours of video. So if you're looking to upskill, would love for you to take that and get your feedback on it. Over time, I'm hoping to add more courses. So that's one option I just want to make available to everybody. The other, if you want just my Excel course, you can also get 50% off there. We covered a lot of the tables, but there's also Power Query, dynamic arrays. You can use the code Modern Excel. And then finally, anyone who's in planning that wants to join a dedicated planning community, we have monthly events. You can get advice from experts on your biggest pain points. There's also an option there. So I have a couple different options for people. This is one of the ways I support myself being a solopreneur. So if any of those interest you, would love for you to sign up for the courses. And I'm going to pause there and just open it up to questions. We have a few minutes. So any questions from anybody, from anything we covered today? And I'll go ahead and leave that up for now. That one there. So feel free to ask any questions. I'll hang on for a few minutes here. And while we're waiting for questions, I will tell one more joke. Does anyone know what the difference between an accountant and an FP&A professional is? When an accountant gets creative, they go to jail. When an FP&A professional gets creative, they get promoted. That's why I say I'm in FP&A instead of accounting. Hopefully I didn't offend any accountants out there. I'm not seeing any questions come through. We'll give it one more minute, and then we'll go ahead and close the meeting. So feel free. If you have any questions, you can also email me after this. I got an error on this entry. Yes, you don't have a bracket in front of your app. And you have, so what you want. So Marla, so let me walk you through that one more time real quick. So let me just pull it back up here, and I can show you what the issue is. So your issue there with the cumulative summing is you need, let me look at yours. So you have the bracket, you have the cells, you don't have a bracket in front of your app. So you just need to put a bracket right here. That should fix your issue, Marla. Try that. Can I show the previous Excel class slide number 2? I think, is it this one? Just a modern Excel course, I believe, is the one you wanted. Tuesday. So there you go. I'll leave that up for a minute. Yeah, it's easy to do, Marla. It's anyone who writes this is kind of like SQL or M or any kind of coding. And there's a shirt I really like that I saw. Roses are red, violets are blue. You have a left bracket missing on line 42. And it's almost always something simple like that. What you could do, if you're on your own and you can't figure that out, Marla, copy it into ChatGPT or Claude AI and say, hey, this is an Excel formula I've written. It's referencing a table. Can you tell me what's wrong? 99.9% of the time, something like that, it will immediately pick it up and say, here's how you should write it and tell you. So that's a great way to help as you're struggling with just, little things like that that are really easy to do. All right. Any other questions from anyone? If not, I'm going to go ahead and close. Thank you for joining. We'll have another session again next week. We'll be doing this all the month of July. Topic has not been determined yet. If you have a preference, feel free to email me. Happy to hear from any of you. All right. Thank you, everyone. All right. Hold on. Hey, how are you doing, Joshua?
Hey, good. Thanks, Paul. How are you?
Good. Give me 1 second here. For some reason, it's saying I can't turn on my camera because I'm low on bandwidth. I think it's because I have my camera still open in another application.